Before we kind of conclude the competition at the end of the day, we've just got a panel now that's going to explore how we can take the successful sector that we've already got and continue to go from strength to strength. We've got a number of speakers that I'll let introduce themselves in a moment, but essentially they represent different perspectives from across the sector. And in a year when we, as techUK, we're going to be supporting government as they develop the next national cybersecurity strategy, what do we want to see as a sector in terms of government intervention? What does industry need to do better? How can we work better between industry, government and academia? All those kind of challenges. So we're going to look at all those different perspectives, whether it be regional development, the potential for regulatory reform and further policy interventions. Of course, as we've mentioned a few times already today, developing the skills framework and also investing in companies across the space, whether that be SMEs or larger organisations as well. So to guide us through this session, I'm delighted to welcome Kat Summer, who's Head of Public Affairs at NCC Group, who's going to chair this panel and introduce the other speakers as well. Over to you, Kat.
Right, thanks very much, Dan, and really pleased to be here and to be joined by three brilliant panelists, which is probably what we need because we've got quite a challenge on our hands over the next hour, because we're trying to do in about 60 minutes what government has been working on for the last 2 years, which is to identify the priorities for the next 5 years in terms of building on the success of the National Cybersecurity Strategy over the last 5 years, scaling some of the work that's been done, deciding which things to continue with and which things to stop doing. Ultimately, what I'm going to do is just do a brief scene setter and then hand over to our panelists, who I will ask to introduce themselves as they answer the first questions. The ask to you as the audience is to please send through any immediate queries that arise or any questions to panelists as they start talking, and we'll try and get through as many of them as possible, and hopefully leave you with a pretty good idea of where we'd like the next cybersecurity strategy to go. But where we are at the moment is, as Dan said, we're waiting for the next iteration of the UK's National Cybersecurity Strategy, which we think will be published sometime later this year in conjunction with a spending review, which bodes well because it does suggest that there is a continued interest in investing in cyber and investing in the UK cybersecurity sector. And ultimately, why wouldn't you want to do that? Because if you look at the latest DCMS sectoral analysis, it shows that in 2021, there were nearly 1,500 UK cybersecurity businesses employing around 45,000 people and delivering 8.9 billion in annual revenue. So quite a success story. We also know what the fundamental pillars of the strategy will look like, because they were outlined in the integrated review in March. And what we know is that the next strategy will continue to strengthen the UK cyber ecosystem. It'll try to take a more coherent approach to skills, recruitment, R&D and innovation across both defensive and offensive cyber. It'll seek to invest in integrated training and education to grow our diverse talent base. It'll support a UK research base and a UK industrial base that can compete internationally and deliver effective cybersecurity solutions. And there's been talk around promoting a strategic advantage in critical cyber technologies. And we also know that the strategy will look at developing regulations and policies that encourage that world-class cybersecurity ecosystem. Beyond those headlines, and sort of in the weeds of it all, we know that there are still issues that haven't been solved despite the successes of the last 5 years. So we've started looking at supply chain security much more. The resilience of critical national infrastructure is still a challenge. There is still that recurring theme of how do we encourage people to do the basics of cyber hygiene really well, and kind of, you know, grab those low-hanging fruit that are still there for the taking. The skills gap is another recurring theme. And then there are sort of, as threats and technologies evolve, we are faced with new things like ransomware. Who'd have thought that 5 years ago, ransomware would be the be all and end all we talk about in mainstream communities talk about when they mention cybersecurity. But one of the sort of recurring solutions that is mentioned is this whole of nation or whole of society or whole of cyber approach that we need to take if we want to continue to be successful. I would translate that to what it really means is that all of us have different skills and different strengths and weaknesses, and we all have a role to play in bringing them to the fore in the pursuit of that joint mission of making the UK a cyber resilient nation. But I'm going to steal from Lindy Cameron, because why not? She is the Chief Executive of the National Cybersecurity Centre. And when she spoke to RUSI earlier this week, delivering the annual security lecture, she said, we know government cannot do this alone. So we need network defenders in industry, academia and civil society, organisations and citizens alike to take steps to protect the UK from attacks and improve cyber resilience. And much like Lindy, I hope that what the Home Office have done in announcing the review of the Computer Misuse Act, we will be able to deepen that collaboration between the various players in the current cyber ecosystem, because we'll then have a legal regime that allows the cyber defenders to put their best foot forward, unleash the UK cyber industry, and do this well in tackling cybercrime rather than having to worry about breaking an outdated law. So in terms of priorities and the long list of wishes that we'll undoubtedly come up with over the next hour, my wish to put on that list, because I'm taking chair's privileges here, is that we do make sure that we have a cybercrime legislation that is fit for the 21st century, and that the Computer Misuse Act is reformed in that image. But I will hand over to our panelists now. As I've said, if you just briefly introduce yourself before you start answering the questions I will throw at you, so the audience knows who you are. But starting with Kath, how do you think that the skill shortage that we keep talking about is actually impacting the UK's ability to be a global leader in cybersecurity?
Hi everybody, and thanks Kat. So introduction, I'm Kath Golding. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer of Nominet, which is the company probably many of you have never heard of, but we are best known for running .uk, the .uk domain name registry, so undoubtedly you will have used our services. We are critical to operations in the internet, so as that, I am a sort of customer of cybersecurity because I'm looking for services all the time with my CISO hat on. But I can also address this panel as a kind of cybersecurity startup as well, because we have been diversifying in the last few years. And our primary service is the PDNS, the Protective DNS Service, where NCSC is our flagship customer, and we use that to protect UK government organisations from malware and the like. So I can answer with either hat on. But your question about you know, the skills gap and everything, and it is talked about a lot. Sorry, I wasn't at the earlier conversations where it was talked about. I've got a couple of points to make. So there's the obvious one in the skills shortage. So sort of in my team, I really struggle to get good candidates. We have run an apprenticeship scheme, which has been fantastic. And I think the Cyber First scheme and all that has been doing, great things. But what I find in my experience is that I still get sort of 90% young males applying for them. And we do try to, we have our own diversity strategy, and so it's trying to recruit those returners to work or more girls. But we're just not getting that level of interest. So I think it is hurting us. It's about numbers, as well as that diversity, which, it isn't just about the diversity tick box, it's about diversity in views and perspectives, which is, ultimately really good for business. And I do want to say, as an opportunity that I've seen, that really just struck me recently. I've been in cybersecurity for 20 years, and I love it as a career. I found it really rewarding and everything. And I actively try and go to these things to promote girls in IT and things like that. And it was a young lady who was recently joined the cybersecurity profession, and she talked about how fulfilling it is from the aspect of doing good. You're trying to catch the bad guys or the bad girls. And that is really rewarding, and absolutely. And I do think that's an opportunity that we could all use in terms of trying to recruit, in that it's not just about being a techie and it's cool to be in cyber. It is actually something that you can be passionate about, and it's very rewarding. And I was going to say, on the other side, wearing my other hat as a startup with the skills shortage issue. We find it really hard. It's so Cyber First and things like that focus on, understandably the cyber skills, the sort of hacking, the white hat type thing, and broadening that out. But actually, we have, what I see is a gap in all those, concentric circles around that, where, it's the people building it. So there's a shortage of DevOps people, seemingly in the UK. It's really hard to recruit new ones. And then it's even harder to find them where they understand security as well. So it would be great to really focus on that. And then also the kind of marketing people and the sales staff, they need to be able to translate, because ultimately they're selling to me, and I'm going to switch off if they're just selling me FUD. I want to know what it is you're selling. And so I think there's a lot of the there's other areas that the cyber UK market needs, that people have probably never considered it. Oh yeah, I want to be a salesperson in the cyber market. So I think there'll be a lot of people that we could, re-educate, retrain, to help us out, because we are short in that kind of area.
Brilliant.
I think that's
thanks very much, Kath. And yeah, I think we might come back and pick up on this element of humanizing cyber and making it not just about the cool tech, but around the detail of what it is that we do, and that our colleagues in the technical profession do, and what the impact is on real people in real life, as part of the broader education around why cyber is so pervasive, and why everyone should know at least a little bit, just like everyone at least knows how to do basic math, for example. Saj, as director of Lorca, I think you'll be very well placed to answer this question, because you do have that first-hand experience of the brilliant innovation that we have seen across the UK cyber startup landscape. But there is, I guess, some concern about how sustainable that pipeline of innovation is, and what more we can do and should do to promote and support that sustainability of innovation. If you just want to take us on that journey.
Great, thank you, Kat. And hi, everyone, good afternoon. My name's Saj Huck, I'm Director of Innovation at Plexel. We're an innovation hub and consultancy which specialises in cybersecurity and adjacent technology domains. Over the last couple of years, we've been playing quite a key role in the delivery of the UK National Cybersecurity Strategy, most notably the develop strand, so the growth and innovation agenda, through the delivery of LORCA, which Kat just mentioned and which I have the privilege of leading too. Yeah, just in terms of the kind of sustainability of the innovation pipeline, I think it is an area of concern. There's been a lot of good news about the cybersecurity SME space over the last few years, largely driven and supported by government intervention. So the market obviously the overall cybersecurity marketplace has expanded quite substantially, and with that, the economic attributes of that marketplace have also expanded. So revenue's up, gross value added is up, investment is up, and the last 2 years have both been record years in succession for investment. So that all sounds great, and it sounds like we're doing the right things and nothing to worry about. But actually, underneath it, underneath those headlines, there are quite a few nuances. So specifically from an investment perspective, there's quite a high availability of venture capital at the moment, largely driven by down valuations and lower valuations of businesses because of economic conditions, and obviously low interest rates means it's everyone's seeking a better return, and therefore there's a lot of money available, but that doesn't mean it's accessible, and it's certainly not accessible to businesses at the earlier stages of their development. And we've seen that quite notably in the last year drop off quite substantially. So as I said, 2019 and then 2020 were both successive record years for investment. However, between 2019 and 2020, there was a 94% drop in funding and investment raised by those seeking funding for the first time. So obviously that's quite concerning, because actually that runs counter to the narrative that the market's expanded, the number of vendors has increased, and the number of successful businesses that we're supporting has also increased. So I think something needs to be supported there, and I'm not quite sure what the answer is, because obviously that's a complex issue, but whether it's a mix of the incentives for investors to, at the riskier stage of the life cycle to support entrepreneurs, and whether that needs to be looked at. That's something I would like to see. But I think it really comes down to, as well, I guess the essence of innovation in this space is quite tricky. So, obviously we're talking about a technical field. Typically, a lot of the technology is quite IP rich, which is obviously a good thing. But then the actual application of that technology to solve an actual market problem is sometimes difficult. It is difficult to to meet bespoke customer requirements in this space, because obviously technology varies across organizations. It's also difficult to understand the real kind of market needs and customer needs, pains, and therefore the gains of applying that solution to help solve their problem. And then it's also it's an area where there's a limited risk appetite to take to do something new, because it's a mission critical area of a business, right? You don't want to get your cybersecurity wrong, and even if you think that a solution is potentially innovative and can give you a differentiated product to help manage your cybersecurity risk, actually sometimes you're incentivized to not actually work with that provider if they're at a certain stage because of your own personal and organizational risk appetite. So I think there needs to be support, specifically like continued support at the earlier stage of the pipeline. So not just in helping people access capital, but also helping people get to market and commercialization. In the UK, we tend to be very good at invention, and we've got a long history of creating lots of great things that have gone on to make a big global impact. But sometimes we're not the best at commercialization, and that's where I'd like to see some focused intervention going forward.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I've heard people say that there's a reason why say Britain gave the world the railways, but Facebook was founded in the US, for example. So I think that cultural thing, but also looking at the systemic and the institutional incentives will be really interesting, and not being afraid, I think, to think out of the box and not just scaling what's worked before, but completely rethinking some of these things. So might also come back to explore some of that in our Q&A part of the session. But I will turn to Melanie next. And Melanie, you have very many hats on, which means your perspective will be totally fascinating as, you know, founder of a small business, but also a leading persona, a leading figure in trying to coordinate what is a very fragmented local and regional landscape a bit more through the cyber clusters. The question for you is what more we can do, or what the best way is to support the development of trusted cyber ecosystems at a local and regional level. Over to you. You're unmute still.
Thank you. So hi, Melanie Oldham, CEO and founder of Bob's Business. For the last sort of 15 years, from that SME business perspective, we've been looking at the human side of cybersecurity and working with organizations to try and change and influence behaviors. But the hats and the influence that I'm coming from today is as chair and founder of the Yorkshire Cybersecurity Cluster, which is a network of professionals, both holding down cybersecurity positions, whether that's from an information security perspective or a governance or a data protection, or heads of IT and how they're dealing with cybersecurity, but also looking at the products, providers, services and the vendors within the market from the local ecosystem and how they're getting out there, but also working with academia, because, you know, there's some great stuff happening in terms of research, and also how they're training and bringing what will be our future workforce. So what we've done as a collaborative group is bring all those people together to say, okay, how can we make sure that we've got the best cybersecurity talent, that we continue to nurture that, but then we also continue to help with the growth and support of those cybersecurity companies. And our cluster is not unique. There's a whole range of clusters throughout the UK. They have been developed and grown predominantly through passion and people who want to care, who see the benefits of working collaboratively, and how, you know, there's a lot more can be achieved if you focus on one specific area as a consortium rather than individually. So these clusters have existed, but with slightly different nuances, some slightly larger than others. But what's been recognised by a number of whether it's governing bodies or just organisations working in the cybersecurity space, is that actually as clusters we've got quite a powerful voice. We've got ability to come together and give views and perspectives on a regional level, but also that there's real value in working sort of localised. And when we're talking about a trusted ecosystem, what does that actually mean? So a couple of things that that Kath was talking about there, which is, you know, that pipeline and that workforce. You know, we've all been in a position whereby we think we found the perfect candidate, we've got them, we've almost got them through the line, we've got them all set up on our system, and then they've been offered a different job elsewhere, or we've trained them and we've gone through the process of having them for 6 months and then they've been pinched by somebody else. And what we're finding is that actually with localized training and education, if you can build relationships really, really early on in people's first sort of entry into cybersecurity, whether that's at schools or universities whilst they're on their programs, then there's actually a better trusted relationship that forms between those businesses and those individuals, and a greater chance that they'll sustain within that organisation as well. So there's a couple of areas there. But what the other hat that I've sort of taken on is as part of creating UKC3, which is the cluster collaborative committee that's actually working to see how can we, the best of what we've achieved in each of the regions, how can we actually sort of focus on that and efforts, resource, money, in order to be able to focus on 3 areas around skills, innovation and growth, and also ecosystems. So there's so much sort of going on in this space that, yeah, there's a lot to be said, because what we tend to find with organisations that are trying to build their resilience who have no comprehension of cybersecurity, those small businesses, those micro organisations that are really at risk, that this is a completely unknown. The big names, the, you know, the showy brochures that come through, the what are you trying to sell me? They will pick something on base whether something looks quality, whether or not it's something they actually need. And what's really needed is that localized support at that level to understand and determine what does that business really need, that isn't overselling of products and services that they can't even implement and can't implement correctly, or won't have the same level of control. So having that localized trusted device tends to be who people go to. So there are other communities that are going around sort of business resilience centres, again, people want to hone into them because it's seen as local support. So it's sort of vital connection. So it's about pulling all those connections together to create an ecosystem that both those outside of cybersecurity feel that they can engage with and is trusted, and that messaging that is really, really successful and what's going on in centralised regions can be honed into localised regions. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you very much. And just to kind of pick out the points of the fact that at the end of the day, we're all people. So relationships and human relationships really do matter, even if at the end of the day, what those human relationships are used for is to discuss deeply technical issues, but using that as the very basis for building trust, we shouldn't forget about. And also I think the coordination and the simplification of what is an incredibly fragmented landscape still, both in terms of the people who are doing their best to try and help, but perhaps quite often don't look what's already out there before they start doing their own thing. But also in terms of, as you say, the solutions that are there and understanding what the solutions are actually there for. Which, while we wait for our audience to come forward with more questions, leads me actually to one of the first questions I just wanted to pose to all of you, really, which is around the SME landscape, because we all know that SMEs are the backbone of the economy. They're an important part of delivering and providing UK GDP and growth. And yet, as Melanie said, their sophistication in buying cyber solutions, or even understanding whether what they're buying is what they need, or whether they know it'll do what they think it'll do, is a real challenge. So there's two elements, I guess, to the question. One is, how do you educate and enable SMEs, at least to a level where they don't fall foul of the snake oil salesman that offers magic in a box and then doesn't really quite deliver. And the other bit is around whether we do actually have sufficient solutions that are exclusively targeted at SMEs, because an SME will not require the enterprise system security setup that a multi-million-pound global business will need. So whether the market currently provides that differentiation and solution depending on the needs of the organization. I just, it's a free for all. Whoever wants to kick us off, please go. Kath,
your lips moving, but we can't hear you talking. Your mic looks to be off, but I don't think it's.
No.
While Kath's finding her mic and her voice, I'll quickly answer the question, which is, how do you get sort of more active involved in your local?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, I'll type the answer in that one.
I can't hear you though. Sorry.
You're good to go, Kath. You're good to go. I can hear you.
So either one of you, while Kath is, as Melanie said, finding her voice.
Well, Mel, I think you raised your hand before, so over back to you.
Yeah, happily. So going back to how do we engage with SMEs, I think the fundamental thing is that NCS's primary objective is to make the UK the safest place to live and work online, which does absolutely involve each and every one of us. And Kath's point earlier about how do you get sales teams involved, how do you get marketing teams involved, and is just pure as much awareness and understanding and communication about it as possible. So making sure that everything that we do from an organisation and business support point of view has that thread of cybersecurity, as opposed to it being an add-on in a particular department, that it is a focus and a concentration of every job role, every policy, but stripping it right back to the educational piece, which is from a skills, are we giving those skills early on? There's, you know, there's a lot of work and a lot of activity at the moment in the skills space on how we educate sort of the 11 to 14-year-olds, but not just around those areas. How do we also educate the people who are influenced them? So whether that's the teachers that are around them and their parents as well. So how we get that messaging across, and making sure that although we may have a target market in mind of who we're trying to get messaging across to, thinking about who they have the influence to influence, if that makes sense. So who can they get the messaging out to, so that we're trying to make that messaging as broad as possible. As I say, there's so much activity out there to support, and I think just making cybersecurity a fundamental thread of all that activity would be a starting block.
Am I back now? Ah, sorry about that. What was I going to say? Oh yes. So from my perspective, yeah, it's a horrendous market. It's really busy. It's really scary. Like I've said before, there's lots of sort of scare tactics, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and I hate all that. But I really support, yeah, what Melanie's saying in terms of the regional support networks. I'm on at least 3, if not 4. And whether that's, you know, it could be, it doesn't have to be you know, local, it could just be your type of business, you know, reach out with to somebody in the same sector with the same kind of problems, and sharing experience has been incredibly valuable. That's, you know, speaking to other registries who know exactly the pain points is invaluable. But I think there's a bit of a discourse in terms of what the market shows, and then the kind of guidance that NCSC is saying. You know, Kat, you talked about getting the basics right, and we're still not there. And I'd echo that in terms of, you know, there's still lots of companies out there with vulnerabilities, and it's hard to get. We talked about the supply chain as well. It's really hard to get the suppliers to kind of tell you how secure their product is. Not just in cyber, in, you know, in anything. Even this morning, you know, we have a process and a policy whereby security check every supplier that's dealing with that has a potential security issue. And so it's like, here's our standard questionnaire, could you answer it please? They said no. The information you've got is on, the information you need is on our website, and it's so neutral. It doesn't tell me anything about, you know, actually, do I trust them or not? So I think we need better ways of, you know, really measuring that supply chain in terms of, you know, is it secure or not? And I know NCSC, you know, they're doing lots of things in this space, starting with kind of the, you know, the TSRs, the telecom security regulations that are going through Parliament now, and they will trickle down. But until then, for the SME, it's just a minefield in terms of, you know, knowing how secure your suppliers are. So I think that would be something I'd like the government to focus on in their next strategy. And also sort of translating what the basics mean. So, you know, I think there is an opportunity for startups to look at the service industry. A lot of the startups that, you know, I've seen some excellent startups coming out of, you know, Lorca and Cylon and things like that, and it's great. But a lot of the time they're trying to build a product or a tool that can absolutely scale quickly, you know, and that's what investors are looking for as well, because they, you know, they want that lovely growth trajectory, which is fine. But I think, you know, there is an opportunity for the service industry to really support small businesses and hold their hands when it comes to managing their, you know, finding the vulnerabilities and helping them patch them and getting the basics right. But, you know, yes, it's potentially not going to make as much money, but maybe that's something on a, you know, to be done on a regional scale, which would be good.
If I can answer Kath's question on chat, if that's okay, which is, when speaking to the board level, have we seen progress in how companies approach cybersecurity as a business enabler? I just sort of give a bit of feedback from what I'm seeing from the organisations I'm working with, which is, yeah, absolutely, that organisations that can actually demonstrate their cybersecurity capability, it does make them more attractive from a supply point of view, because more and more organisations are having that requirement. They need to know from data processing that the organisations they're working with are more secure. But from that SME point of view, the fundamental benefits of having good information security structure, a good information security management system, is actually your business is more efficient and more capable and more resilient. So I think there's a lot of efficiencies. So when people tend to go down the, whether it be the ISO 27001 route or whatever route of compliance you go down, people tend to think it's as a tick box exercise to win contracts, and they don't actually think from a business point of view, how does that make me more efficient? How does it make me more resilient? So that actually, should the inevitable happen with whether it's an insider threat happens, you actually can bounce back so much quicker. And that's something we're seeing from a lot of organizations that are going down that route, which is, oh my God, it's made my business so much more efficient, so much better practice. We've got some, real benefits out of this, rather than just meeting what the supplier wanted. But, it does add as a sales to demonstrate your security, because you are then seen as trusted. And it's what that element of trust and the perception of trust brings.
Kat, if I just, your question about SMEs and their security, I think that is definitely an area that needs to, obviously Kath and Melanie agree as well that it's an area that needs to be looked at, because there's just such a, like, given the kind of sector of the economy, the segment of the economy that SMEs make up, there's just such a wide base of risk there, which is just almost systemic, that Melanie's just mentioned about lack of cyber hygiene, and a lot of the times the way to kind of disrupt a cyber attack or cyber incident isn't anything relatively sophisticated. It's basic stuff, but there's just so many companies out there that just don't have the basic provisions in place. And that's obviously been catalyzed by COVID, because everyone's had to bring digital into some element of their business model. Whether you're a technology business or you're the butcher, and you're taking online payments. So I think there definitely needs to be more focus on how to make cybersecurity more accessible from a consumption perspective for businesses that are non-technology centric or tech savvy. And there's a in terms of like people producing solutions for that marketplace, it's often overlooked, we see, because a lot of the market pool at scale is from enterprise and enterprise buyers, and therefore, a lot of startups produce products and services which are geared towards the enterprise market, but that's massively competitive one, but it's also hugely noisy, as Kath has said, and I'm sure has to deal with on a daily basis. So, but there's a whole other segment of the economy that has specific needs in cyber, and potentially actually, the buying cycle is a lot shorter in terms of reaching them, if you can reach those customers and if you can convey what you're doing simply, because potentially these people are less geared up for the complexities of total security and so forth. And again, really that comes back to a kind of messaging perspective as well, which Kath mentioned at the beginning of the call. That's a real problem area in this space. Just trying to understand what people do, and for people to tell you what they do simply is hard. And we work in this field. If you don't, then gosh, it must be really tough, right? But trying to put those basic skills in place for people who are trying to really, because these products are needed. That's why this market's growing. Cybersecurity is really needed, but it's the fundamental enabler of growth through lots of different dimensions, and therefore we need to make sure that people can get to market effectively to the people who need it. And definitely the SME landscape is an area of the economy that definitely needs cybersecurity.
Yeah, the point you touched on there, in the sense of the enterprise gold ticket items are the ones that organisations tend to focus on, because then it funds activities, and therefore subsequently selling whatever it will be, a training course of £3.49 is not necessarily going to have that impact that's going to be able to put loads of investment in the business, but it's lots of them. And that's where these sort of ecosystems and communities working really, really well, because if you have a cybersecurity professional organisation that is aware of the products and services that are happening around them, it's easy for them to go in and have that conversation, but talk about other things very easily. And then there's that shared, I'll pass you a referral if you pass a referral back to me. And it's that kind of, so getting into SMEs, that's why that trusted community really, really works, but also makes more sense for economies of scale, because obviously to market and target for each of those individual SMEs is a lot harder, as you're saying. It tends to take a lot of money for very little return, whereas the enterprise sales are very, very different and easier to achieve in that respect.
The problem is, so like I think in cyber, typically technology is at the basis of the value proposition of a product or a service, and therefore it's not relatable sometimes. You know, Lindy Cameron said the other day in her RUSI talk that Kath mentioned about the insidious cyber threat. It's actually not about the threat from, but it's a threat to. So what would this mean if you get hit by a cyber event? What does that actually translate to? Well, it means that you can't run your business. Actually, for a lot of small businesses, it could be an existential event. And I think conveying that in terms of, you know, relatability to people who aren't in and around the technology sector is really important, such that they take this seriously, but also that they have, they have access to a marketplace that is has quality as well as affordability, and both of those things are variable at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to move us on a little bit, and there have been a few questions which, you know, fit under the, I guess, leveling up label, because, you know, we want to be on vogue with rhetoric and all that. One of the questions, Saj, is for you around how many regional SMEs you have seen applying to Lorca as a London-centric accelerator, and then in a similar sort of vein of going to the regional ecosystem, Melanie, to you, in terms of how much information and exchange of views and kind of lessons learned and best practice there is between the clusters. And I might add, versus the rivalry and the sort of competitive element between them. Saj, if you want to go first.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, despite the L in our names, which we should probably correct that, we've actually always been a national innovation centre. So happily, we've had quite a spread of SMEs that we've worked with, both in London and beyond. And actually more I think the last count, 58% of the companies we worked with, we have worked with over the last 2.5 years, actually originate from outside of London. So yes, we, you know, in answer to that question, yes, we have seen quite a healthy flow of applications and participants from outside of London, which is good to see. And I think that's actually down to the fact that, as Mel touched on earlier, you know, a lot of the innovation in the UK actually happens outside of London. The challenge is accessing industry and global marketplaces to actually, you know, generate business growth, which is a problem in the region sometimes, because, you know, there's a limited supply of customers potentially, or a more narrow focus on marketplace opportunities. But that's where I think going forward that, you know, it's great to see that, you know, specialist provisions and support for companies and early stage businesses is actually being put into place in the regions. Because I think, you know, there was another question in the chat about how this ecosystem and the accelerator movement and so forth needs to evolve. I think we need to integrate a little bit more between the central, you know, metropolitan areas and more kind of disparate activities around some of the universities and academia that typically exist in the regions where IP is actually created, such that people get the benefit of not just the local talent pool, local expertise, but also access to global markets and also finance too.
Yeah, there was an answer. There was a question. I don't know if you've seen the Q&A, Saj, because there's quite a few in there for you, but talking about international markets as well. And I think that, yes, we are seen as a place for external investment wanting to come in. You know, we get lots of inquiries of companies overseas that are looking to invest in cybersecurity companies in the UK, but also on the reverse, it's for companies wanting to come into the UK, there is a lot of support out there. There are a lot of initiatives, so it makes it a really good place to set up, you know, whether that's basing yourself in London, which, you know, we're all working differently now, so most things are done remotely, but arguably the cost of living is far higher, versus actually relocating up into South Yorkshire, which is considerably less. You know, you can get a lot of space. So if you've got a lot of employees, a lot of space, you can get that relatively cheap, but you can also access the same level of innovation and access to expertise that would really, really accelerate the growth of the business. So again, it's a really, really attractive location. And, you know, there's lots of funding around to support the organisations with that relocation. As to whether or not there's too much competition, I think the argument is it's a big space we're trying to fill, and there are so many companies that we've identified that need all this support. I think one of the things about competition is it makes us all be able to differentiate what we do a little bit more, and strengthens us and actually ups our game. So, you know, we know at Bob's Business where our sweet spot is, what we do really, really well versus what some of our competitors do. Sometimes there may be opportunities for collaboration because of what is needed in a particular bid where we don't provide everything and another partner does. So I think there's plenty of space for more and more companies in all areas of cybersecurity. Again, because it brings out the best of the best, and it also helps to really, you know, bring other organizations together. I think there's been a move in companies smaller companies also wanting to collaborate a lot more, because they know that actually what they provide is really, really quality products and services, but they don't necessarily have the same scope as some of the larger providers out there on the market. So somebody might prefer to go to a larger supplier because one product, they have all the products and services that you may need as an organization, but actually as a consortium and as a collaboration, you can get really, really quality products, potentially arguably a lot less, with a lot more customization, a lot more personalization, something that's more fitted to your organization. And I think for organizations that don't understand the cybersecurity landscape and need their hand holding, they want organizations that can be a little bit flexible. You know, some of the larger organizations, they have very, very good scalable models because the same thing is repeatable over and over and over again and doesn't have that customization. So it's just determining from an organizational point of view if that little bit of investment wants to go in having something that's a little bit more built for their purpose and a little bit more bespoke, and maybe having their handheld a little bit more because it is an unknown space to them.
Great. I think we've covered regional collaboration, innovation in regions, attractiveness as an international location, companies wanting to set up here and benefiting from that, which means we are probably able to move on to the question. It's very pithy.
Kat, if you don't mind, just one thing on the international point that we have seen though, is that over the last two, because obviously there was a lot of uncertainty as we headed towards the end, you know, leaving the EU and so forth. When speaking to international companies to come into the UK, it was no longer a no-brainer decision for them. It became more of a considered long-term view as to whether they would want to set up their European headquarters in the UK and in London, you know, usually as well. Because there was just so much uncertainty. It'd be interesting to see whether that lifts. I mean, the reality is this is still a great place to be from a global perspective for all sorts of reasons. I think not just because of geographical proximity to Europe, but also because of, you know, time zones and so forth and language and etc. But also actually from a talent perspective, it's a great place to be because of the technology density that we have in the UK. Like the fact you've got so many different verticals, like all, you know, relatively close together, that's something that we sometimes take for granted. And actually, so I think going forward, we will continue to be quite internationally attractive in terms of a destination. But from speaking to some of the businesses that we work with who are expanding to the UK, they've definitely taken a more cautious approach to entering the UK market over the last 18 months from what we've seen.
Yeah, thanks. That's a very good point. Very good balanced view on attractiveness of cyber. Yes, broader economic factors and uncertainty, not quite as wonderful, I suppose. Pithy question: what should government be doing in terms of regulation and legislation? I think I've given my answer, which is basically reform the Computer Misuse Act to include greater protections for cybersecurity professionals so they can do what they're best at. But it's not all about the CMA. So, Kath, kick us off. What else would we like to keep DCMS and Cabinet Office busy with over the next few years?
Sure. I mean, you know, with my CISO hat on, I can say, you know, we've had legislation. When I started Nominet in 2012, there was no real big legislation. Whereas in whenever it was 2018, GDPR came in, and also the EU NIS, Network and Information System. So we've gone from being not regulated to quite highly regulated with Ofcom. I think I'm often asked, you know, is it helpful? You know, has it made you more secure? Does regulation make you more secure? And my answer is somewhat sitting on the fence, in that it's helped me in a way, because it's just given a little bit more incentive, but it's what we were kind of doing anyway. But it helps to have that bit of a stick, to, you know, to say it's not just me saying it, it is the regulator. And, you know, they are trying to work closely with, you know, industry, to make sure, like I'm saying, on the TSRs, that won't impact us immediately, but will go to the wider critical infrastructure in future. And they are talking to industry in a way that, you know, is really useful. But I have to say, the obvious thing from a business perspective, you know, you don't want to be anti-competitive, and it does add a cost. And so what I appeal to governments to do is to look at some of the kind of the frameworks, such as, you know, NCSC has their cyber assessment framework, and then there's NIST, and then, I mean, we're currently building out a solution in Australia, and Australia have, I don't know if anybody's here has done any business with the Australian government, but I call it the compliance from hell, because they have this spreadsheet of sort of over 700 requirements, and we have to go through each one. I mean, it's very good, I have to say, it's very comprehensive, and it's updated regularly. So from a security perspective, I can't kind of criticize it, but it is quite difficult. And so we have this complex, you know, I've currently got sort of 7 different areas I've got to comply with, and they're all very similar, but slightly different. And there's a lot of paperwork that we have to do. So I absolutely implore governments to communicate and have guidance that are, you know, that are more similar, more international, please.
I don't think that's just necessarily governments as well. Just another point, when you're an SME trying to provide products and services to larger organisations, the number of hurdles you have to jump through in order to be able to meet their security requirements is ridiculous, because they've been written a policy, a procedure that you need to complete this 200-300 questionnaire, that as a small business it takes you more time to complete than it's necessarily worth.
Absolutely. And one thing I think has been quite surprising, you know, the government has pioneered cyber essentials, which, you know, is fine. They're not saying it's going to solve everything, but it's for the SME market. Well, shouldn't we make that an international standard, or at least, you know, I'd like the governments to work on an international level. So as a if I have that stamp, I can use that to sell. You know, it's a business opportunity, because as I said earlier, you know, you want security as it's a business thing as well as just preventing incidents.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a mapping exercise that needs to be done as to, okay, what does that actually mean that you've done and you adhere to? Because going back to that previous point of large suppliers wanting you to go through the questionnaire, is I have actually got to the point previously for a really large vendor, when this questionnaire came through again, is to turn around and say, I have ISO 27001, if you want to see my statement of capability and speak, you know, with, by all means, but I'm not going to take that as read as I've gone through this process, with your questions mapped to that. And I think it's the same with, you know, there should be a mapping exercise that says, okay, if you have this, 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 and this, then actually you've met these core elements of criteria. I think, you know, government are doing a lot. The other problem we've got is we've got some really antiquated laws as well that we're working to with the Computer Misuse Act, and even getting, you know, the latest strategy out, it's delayed. Everybody's delayed. Just having things a little bit quicker would be great. I think enforcing a lot more in terms of the curriculum at school for cybersecurity would make a difference and an impact. And I think also on consumer products and services, that they come with the security settings by default, not something that's enabled. I think let's try and make it easier for people to easier for it to be implemented to be more secure by default, rather than having to, and understand that, for that there may be a compensation when it comes to marketing and things like that. But actually security is more important than market penetration, from a consumer point of view. So I think having some legislation that enforces what should be out there in terms of warning and how settings should be configured so that people are protected their rights and things.
Yeah, I agree. I think definitely welcome the interventions that government's been thinking of and taking in the IoT, secure by design, supply chain spaces. I think consumer IoT specifically, as Mel said, there's such a proliferation of technology out there that something needs to be done to incentivize people who manufacture these products to embed better security at the core of these products. And I think, interestingly, from a big business perspective, probably many people have started to see that Apple have been quite leading edge recently in terms of how they're trying to compete on privacy. I think it would be quite interesting if we could try and encourage a world where people compete more holistically on privacy and security generally. And I think obviously regulation in that space could potentially help that. So it'd be interesting to see how that goes with the growth of IoT. Just from a general kind of market incentives perspective, I would love to see more support, more SME friendly policies around procurement specifically. So I think government's got quite a unique role to play potentially as an early adopter of technology and innovation. But just a lot of the processes aren't fit for purpose in terms of actually trying to do business or allow SMEs to do business with, sorry, my lights just turned off, do business with government. But, I'd hope that would be looked at. Obviously, it's a big kind of top level policy objective to spend £1 in every £3 or something with SMEs by very relatively near date. So it'll be good to see that kind of encouraged a little bit more, including through the supply chain. So major suppliers to government and enterprise incentivized to transact appropriately with SMEs. And then I think as well, lastly, Kath mentioned this previously about information asymmetry, which is the grandiose title for people, not really being able to find out what you need to from vendors. I think some level of intervention there, or some kind of non-partisan approach there to try and balance that out a little bit between the buy and the sell side of the cybersecurity marketplace would be massively impactful, and it would help those who consume security products and services, i.e. CISOs and others, just buy things on quality, not necessarily on convenience or cost. And by buying things on quality, that's the way you're going to reduce risk, and then that's how you create a marketplace where the best survive and grow. So that's what I'd like to see kind of supported going forward.
Perfect. I'm totally aware that we've got about 2 minutes left in our allotted time slot. So very, very quickly, to close us off, let's answer that final question of the biggest challenge over the next 5 years that you want the National Cybersecurity Strategy to find an answer to. Let's start with Melanie. Go. You've got 30 seconds just to give everyone a chance to say their piece.
Privacy. Getting people to understand personal privacy and protection to me is the biggest one, and then obviously the criminals. With not one to exclude it, they'd be to me the two biggest.
Brilliant. Kath, can you beat the time?
Break down the international barriers, whether that's in crime, policing, or regulation and things like that.
Right, Sach.
From a threat perspective, ransomware is a horrible thing.
Right, so if we conclude, there would have been lots of other questions for us to talk about, like how do we actually measure success? How do we make sure that we've got a baseline and a benchmark and evaluate progress in the next 5 years? and all those sort of things. But I think that the takeaway is we need to focus, or the next strategy should focus on privacy, breaking down international barriers and ransomware, while also taking into account all the other things we talked about, such as don't forget it's about people, don't forget it's about trust, don't forget, at the end of the day, we're not that special in cyber. A lot of the things we talked about do apply to other sectors as well. It's just my personal remark. But it's finding the right messaging, trying to educate people without tapping into their deepest, darkest fears, focusing on quality of solutions and finding the right incentives to allow people to focus on quality of solutions, but also to allow people to take risks with their money and their investment, because it might just unlock even greater innovation than we have seen to date. And with that, I'm very proud to say we're only 1 minute over. Thank you so much to Kath, Mel and Saj. I've really enjoyed this. I hope our audience have as well. And I know that government will be looking for input and further views. And hopefully some of what we said today, we shall see reflected in the National Cybersecurity Strategy as and when it is published later this year. Thank you very much all.